So this is a fun one to get into. This really is, because this started out as a simple live, as me wanting to do a live on this topic and going, this is going to be fun. This is going to be interesting. And it was just going to be on Britannic and Kongo. And it changed quickly into, let's pick 10 days. 10 days from any part of the year. And I picked the 21st to the 30th of November. And let's see what submarines have done on those days and what's happened to those submarines. Because it's a really interesting sampling tool to use, to go, look, we're just picking 10 days at random. How effective are submarines really? What do they achieve in this period? What are the methodologies they use of attacking? And starting off with two famous ones in that period is quite a good idea, because hopefully it grabs your attention, hopefully you're going to find it interesting. But there are a lot more ships than just these two sunk in this 10-day period. A lot more ships than just these two. But they are kind of interesting how they go, because let's be honest, Britannic, well, we often suggest that of the sisters, Olympic sucks up all the luck for all of them. But honestly, I think Britannic just uses her luck up rather quickly. Because when she's sunk, she's not on her first trip to the Mediterranean in World War One as a medical ship, as a hospital ship. She's on her sixth voyage to the Mediterranean. Her sixth time running the gauntlet, going through to pick up personnel and recover the wounded. And she's a very useful asset in this role. But it's her sixth time. Sixth time. Through the Mediterranean. In an era where submarines were incredibly capable when it came to mine warfare. And that's realistically the point we're talking about in terms of World War One. And there's a reason why the Royal Navy, when you're talking about their preparations for World War Two, and they're ordering the Flyer class early on, they're ordering the Flyer class with minesweeping gear. It's the same with the Bathurst class of the Royal Australian Navy. And it's the same with a lot of vessels. They're ordering them as minesweepers. Why? Because the number one killer, the most dangerous, most potent weapon in a submarine's arsenal, were mines. Because they could lay them without people knowing they'd laid them, and they could be well away by the time they started causing damage, which meant that there was very little risk to the submarines. Submarines are ambush predators. They are able to survive as long as they're able to hide, as long as you don't know where they are. Well, in the case of U-73, I know U-79, SM U-79 is pictured, but that's because I couldn't find a decent one of U-73. She is an ambush predator. If she gets caught by an escort, etc., she could face real trouble, even in World War One. Admittedly, there's no HMS Dianthus of World War II around, but there are Flyer-class sloops in this time period, and they are pretty darn aggressive. And the reason I bring up HMS Dunedin from World War II is she's, of course, the Flyer-class corvette, which rams an enemy submarine 4 times to make sure it sinks. Drops depth charges, fires 4-inch shells, does everything it can to sink the sunning submarine. The trouble for a submarine is, and a lot of the time this happens, if they get damaged, if they get sunk, they're all dead. A ship gets damaged, it has a chance to get off. And this is the interesting thing with the Britannic. And the thing that I want to talk about, I do want to talk about her being mined, I do want to talk about her loss, and I want to talk about how U-73 happened to be down the Mediterranean World War One. But I also want to talk about the fact that so many of her people survived because of the actions taken by Captain Bartlett, because of the actions taken by her crew, and the difference in the waters they were going into. Because the Mediterranean is a lot nicer to go into than the North Atlantic. A lot nicer. As has been commented many times by people who found themselves in it. Now, U-73 had left Germany back in April 1916, 1st of April 1916. And she got to the Mediterranean via the North Sea, North Atlantic route. En route, she found an Atlantic steamer, she laid mines off Lisbon and Malta, and, well, she managed to even lay some mines outside of the Grand Harbour of Valletta. And that cost 4 ships. HMS Russell, pre-Dread, Royal Sovereign style battleship, Nasturtium, a sloop, a trawler, Crowson, and a yacht, Agusa. So she'd already been very, very successful. Very, very successful, thanks to her mines. In fact, her operational history and likely success rate is entirely attributable pretty much to mines. The number of torpedoes she uses is very few and very rare, and the overwhelming damage she causes is carried out by mines. She's a mine-laying sub. She's operating from Catrato. It's a nice port facility. She operates from the Polo Catrato Flotilla, which is based in Polo and Catrato. And it's a joint force between the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians. In comparison, Britannic, well, she had been summoned back into service after being removed from service for a couple of months, pretty much, on the 26th of August 1916. She did her 4th voyage of 1916 straight away. She made a 5th trip in October. And then she's on her 6th trip in November. 6th trip in 1 year. They're pretty much all in 1916. Going backwards and forwards to pick up wounded from the Middle East and from the various campaigns going on around the Mediterranean and getting them home to the UK. Now, there are 2 good reasons for this. One, the medical facilities in the UK were far superior to anything they had access to out there. So basically you consider her something like the Mercy flights. That's the role she's doing. Yes, she's got hospital facilities aboard. Yes, she can do treatment. Yes, she can do surgery. Yes, she's got x-rays and other diagnostic equipment. But honestly, her job is to try and get people home. And the thing is, she has all that extra equipment because, well, let's be honest, it's going to take a lot longer than a flight. It's going to take a lot longer than a flight. And she left Naples on a Sunday afternoon. There had been a storm holding her in since the 17th, and despite her completing her coaling and water stop, and frankly, once it wore off, Captain Bartlett wanted to move. The seas rose a bit again as Britannic left port, and by the next morning, i.e. the Monday morning, she has managed to get through the storms and has passed the Strait of Messina without problems. She rounded Cape Matapan on the 21st of November, and then she's heading through the Cape Channel. That's between Cape Surin, which is the southernmost point of Attica. It's the same part of Greece which contains Athens, I think, and the island of Caire. She had 1,000 personnel aboard, and they are pretty much entirely crew, 679, Royal Army Medical Corps personnel, 315 of them, plus 77 nurses and a captain. So, Yeah. She's got a full crew, but she's got no patience. And this makes a bit of a difference. This means, honestly, this could have been far worse. If there had been a large number of patients aboard or things like that aboard, things would have been far more problematic. Far, far more problematic. At 08:12 hours Eastern Time, Britannic is hit by a mine. A massive mine. This mine, by the way, that she's being hit by on 08:12 hours on the 21st of November 1916 had been laid in the Kier Channel on the 21st of October 1916, a month earlier. That's a great thing about mines. They're kind of an investment strategy for submarines when they're used right. They can be paying dividends long after you've left the area, long after you've moved on. Now, one of the things that had held up Britannic's entry into service had been the fact that she'd been redesigned a bit since the Titanic had been lost. They had designed her that she could stay afloat if any 6 watertight compartments were flooded. Any 6. She has 5 watertight bulkheads rising all the way up to B deck, and she had various other bulkheads that were positioned to help and support these things. There are issues, though, for her. And one of the issues that they don't realise until possibly too late is that the nurses have taken to airing out the wards by opening the portholes. Portholes are supposed to be closed unless permission granted. And especially when they're sailing under these circumstances, portholes were supposed to be closed. But nurses, of course, were prioritising the hospital care and the hospital cleanliness for when they have patients. So there's a reason for having those windows open. There is a reason for having the portholes open. But that creates a problem later on. The explosion was felt in different areas aboard the ship in different ways. Some thought it was just a small hit because of where they were. Others, including Captain Bartlett and Chief Officer Hume, his executive officer pretty much, on the bridge, realised exactly what had happened and immediately went into damage control mode. The explosion was starboard side. It's positioned almost directly between holds 2 and 3, and the explosion itself managed to damage the watertight bulkhead between holds 1 and the forepeak. This means that they've lost 4 watertight compartments already. Okay, so she's got a maximum of 6 before she's in trouble, and she's lost 4. Unfortunately, there's also this thing called the Boilerman's Tunnel. Now, that is exactly what you might expect. It's a tunnel which connects the quarters of the firemen, the men who man the boilers, from the bow, with Boiler Room 6. Now, you or I might think, Alex, hang on. So you're telling me there's this supposed extra tube which runs along these spaces for these people to communicate, and it's been added in for what reason? To allow safe communication of the personnel, or to keep these personnel out of the way of passengers? You'd be right on the latter one. Now, I would say what they tend to do these days is, rather than having these sort of holes or these tubes that run along, is they might have normal watertight doors, but also they tend to have a scenario so they can go up to a deck, and they have a deck which is literally a non-passenger area deck, and that's for the staff to wander back and forwards. And there might be space on that deck where passengers can transition through, but it's very much the crew deck space where the crew can operate and move around. And you do that because then you have that raised up above all these things, and so you have more watertight integrity down below. Now, this tube was damaged, and because it was damaged, water was flowing into boiler room 6 through that tube. So there's your 5th compartment in trouble. Issue here, we're now at 5 of 6. That is your maximum. 5 of 6. That point, Bartlett orders the watertight doors closed. This is what Captain Bartlett's doing. He's ordering watertight doors closed. He's ordering a distress signal. They don't realise the distress signal has worked because their cables which they've got to receive, which are strung between the masts, have snapped. They are managing to transmit, but they do not know anyone has received them. And this is immediately picked up by vessels like HMS Scourge and HMS Heroic, and even some of the locals. But they don't know it, because they're hearing nothing in response. So you have to remember again, think, as far as the captain knows, he is completely on his own. The captain can't afford to presume that there is anyone coming to aid him, because as far as he knows, he's completely on his own. And so therefore you have to start judging it in that regards. And you also have to remember that the safest lifeboat for all the crew, the safest place for them all, is aboard this. You might think, well, Alex, why are you saying it's sinking? As long as it stays afloat, that ship is far safer than being in the lifeboats. It has far more structural integrity, far more protection for the personnel, far more food and all those things, and they are far likelier to survive on her. So his idea basically goes to, I want to get this vessel as close to shore as possible. I want to make it so that I can get her, if possible, that she can survive, because she's a vital national asset as well as company asset. But most importantly, the closer I get her to shore, the safer my people are for getting off. Because also, that's the other thing. If you can get her closer to shore, you can shorten the distance and range for the people in the water, in the lifeboats to get to shore. And she's carrying more lifeboats. She's carrying a lot more lifeboats. She has various cranes. Now, they've been positioned in ways which sometimes people have problems with, but honestly, they make sense from the organisation pattern of the period. We would probably do it differently today. We do it very differently, but she's got them. At this point, it's found that the watertight door between boiler rooms 5 and 6 has failed to close properly. Or it's either broken down, it's being moved due to the force explosion. There are all sorts of options, but it's not closed properly. And so water's flowing into boiler room 5. Now, theoretically, she could stay motionless with all six sections flooding. But remember, he doesn't know that support is on its way. And you'd stay motionless if you think so, if you know support's on its way, and you can save. But honestly, he also makes the right decision because of the next thing. Remember when I mentioned those portholes? Well, pretty much the bulkheads between boiler rooms 5 and 4 and it are undamaged, and that is what's supposed to, at this point, make sure you're going to survive. But because the portholes to ventilate the wards are open, and the ship's list has increased its angle, water starts flowing in to those portholes. At this point, there is no chance for staying afloat. Now, Bartlett has tried consistently to get the boiler rooms evacuated, and in about 10 minutes, Britannic's roughly in the same condition Titanic was an hour after the collision with the iceberg. The portholes on E-deck are underwater within 15 minutes. She's got a list to put a starboard. She's got all these things developing. At this point, Bartlett gives the order to turn starboard, because you're listing the starboard, so it's easier to turn the starboard towards the island of Care and attempt to beach her there. Now, it's difficult thanks to the weight of the rudder and the fact that now how do I put this? The propellers are not quite in the water as they should be, but they're doing their best. Steering gear has been knocked out by the explosion, which at this point is realized was a much worse problem because they tried all their manual systems to do it. And so they moved to trying to steer by engine. Now, remember what I said, the propellers are starting to come out of the water. And pretty much Bartlett does something which you'll see destroyers do and other vessels do when their rudder's damaged. He orders the ship to have its port shaft operating at a higher speed than the starboard side. You can do this. You can get them to a higher speed rate of revolutions. And that can moves the ship towards Kea. He has the staff preparing to evacuate. Now, they're allowed to take only the most important, most valuable belongings. He didn't want the boats to be lowered into the water at this point. Didn't want it. And Major Harold Priestley, in charge of the Royal Army Medical Corps, is at this point inspecting the cabins to ensure no one has been left behind. That's what he's doing. Everyone has a drill practiced. This is an important thing going on here. You're basically dealing with personnel who have now been experienced at these voyages and are used to it. There's even someone aboard who has survived the sinking of the Titanic and the collision of the Olympic. And they will survive the sinking of the Britannic. Bartlett managed to get the Britannic edging closer and closer to Kea. Now, at this point, Third Officer Francis Law has a bright idea. He decides to start launching some lifeboats. Now, there's a problem with doing that. It might be your instinct to do so, but those two lifeboats are drawn towards the still churning, partly surface propellers. Bartlett has to order an emergency stop. But the boats are both drawn into the propellers and 30 people are killed. Luckily, the engines stopped before any more boats are lost, but the trouble is, at this point, Francis, who was probably acting out of his best instincts, and was going, well, I haven't been given the order, but we're listing enough, I need to do this. The urge to act is understandable. But he's just the captain. He hasn't read the full script of what the captain's trying to do. The captain isn't holding people back because he wants to kill people. He's trying to get closer and closer to that island. And now by doing this, he's stopped that effort when they might have achieved something. And through wishing to save people, has arguably cost 30 people their lives. And that's it's best intentions. And it's an absolutely messy scenario. But no. Now, by 0850 hours, and remember, they had been hit with the explosion at 0812 hours, so 38 minutes previously. Now the ship stopped. Bartlett's getting pretty much everyone off he can. And they'd launched 35 lifeboats successfully, and most of the people aboard had gone. With mostly ship's crew remaining, apart from some other stubborn people, Bartlett called a halt to the evacuation and tried to restart the engines. He wanted to try and beach the Britannic. Remember, she's done 6 tours, 6 trips as a hospital ship, not because the Royal Navy really loves her, but because she's so friggin' good at the job. She's got the space and everything for it. So if you can save this asset, there are a lot of other lives you can save. And a ship like this is an asset. Within 10 minutes, it's realised that the rate of flooding has increased due to the forward motion. There's no chance of doing anything, and it's now reached D-deck. At this point, the final order to stop the engines is given by Bartlett. 2 final long blasts of the whistle, and this is the accepted signal to abandon ship. And as water comes up to the bridge, he and Assistant Commander Dyke walk. They don't run. They don't tremor. They walk off the deck and into the water. They are the last 2 people to leave the vessel, and they immediately swim to a collapsible boat which was waiting for them, and from there they continue to coordinate the rescue operations from that boat whilst wet. Britannic herself at this point gradually capsizes, slowly, heartbreakingly so, goes to starboard. And one by one the funnels collapse into the water, and by the time she's all gone, by the time the stern rises out of the water, the bow's actually on the seabed, because that's how shallow water she's in. By 0907 hours, she's gone completely through the water. 55 minutes, roughly. Now, the advantages for her people going into water was that, rather than it being -2, it was roughly 20 degrees centigrade, which, by the way, is pretty much what I have my house temperature. So, it was comparatively nice. They had 35 lifeboats launched successfully, compared to Titanic's only 20. And help arrived within 2 hours after the first distress call. So they had another hour and 5 minutes. But honestly, whilst some very nice fishermen do arrive from Care, and HMS Scourge arrives at 1000 hours, and Heroic arrives not that long afterwards, some of the boats had already managed to make it to the beach on Kia and were setting up medical facilities as lifeboats came ashore, to try and help save the injured. They managed to take over a quayside. And they did really well. Of the 1,066 people aboard, 1,036 people survived the sinking. "38 were injured." That's good. That's very, very good. And that's mostly down to the changes which have been done in this class since loss of Titanic. But also, it's down to A, the way the captain and the crew reacted, and B, the water they're in. But you have to think there are lots of opportunities to save the vessel and to save all those crew. And you do have to put against that the total number lost versus some of the decisions made by different personnel in the time of stress. And the thing is, a ship sinking is a time of great stress, so you have to give them a leeway. You have to give people a bit of leeway. But they all do their duty. Now, Kongo, well, she's a sort of different kettle of fish. A slightly different kettle of fish. She's a modernised battle cruiser, and please note that battle cruiser, one word. And for those who haven't seen, well, there's a spectrum. And I have to repeat this in so many videos, but I always act as if every video is its own individual video and standalone, and you might not have seen any other videos, so please indulge me. If you have seen this day before, run right ahead. It'll be about a couple minutes on this. Spectrum is simple, of capital ships, and it's what, to an extent, they talk about in different phraseology in this period. But a battle cruiser, 2 words, is something like the Invincible class. It's got cruiser level subdivision, and it's got the possibly even only armoured against cruiser guns. It's not going to have much cover in the way of much covered. And usually I use the the idea of the armoured people in the medieval period we talk about there. They might have a breastplate and a helmet, and that's it. We're talking people who have very similar. They might even just have padded jerkin and maybe a bit of a helmet. That's all. We're talking nothing much, nothing major, but they've got some coverage. And the thing is, when we're talking about difference between ships, it's coverage of the armour, not thickness. Because if you have 13 inches, let's say you have 13 inches of thickness armour, but it only covers this area, it's not much help. Although trying to walk with that much armour on you would be interesting. And then the battle cruiser, one word, has more subdivision. It has more coverage. And some of these, like the Kongos, get very close to the line where they could be fast battleships, but they're not, as they're originally built. And then a fast battleship has more full coverage. So basically, let's say the battle cruiser, one word's equivalent is they will definitely have a helmet, definitely have a chest plate, and possibly even some covering on their thighs if they're mounted troops, and maybe something on their shoulders as well. A fast battleship's got full coverage. They are a knight. But they are still able to move flexibly, etc., and do the things they need to do. A dreadnought, well, if a human's armoured to the level and subdivided to the level a dreadnought is, then they are wearing the equivalent of the armour which you had to be hoisted onto your horse for. They are jousting armour, never for combat. It's so heavy you can barely move in it, but it's the absolute safest you can wear, and so if you're doing jousting, you might well do it. But that's the point. That's the level of coverage we're talking about, and subdivision. And this is the point. The Kongos are tigers, and they're already up to the heavy end of the battle cruisers. The German battle ones, if they were slightly faster, possibly with their density, could qualify for it. Because one of the things that also affects all this, and the biggest impact that drives the evolution onward and what they're getting away with, is the power density and how much power you can get per ton per cubic meter or cubic foot for every thing you allocate to the engines. Why does that matter? Because honestly, there isn't much advantage to having a 40-knot ship versus a 36-knot ship. It's not much advantage. There is advantage to having a 28-knot ship versus a 21-knot ship. And if you can get it up to 36 knots or 33 knots, there is still some advantage. We're talking something which is a 25% speed advantage over the 28-knot ship. And a massive advantage over a 21-knot ship. But if you're capable of going to roughly 36 knots, 35 knots, and you say, I want to go to 40 knots, which I can do in this form, you're getting an extra ninth, an extra 4 knots, versus you could have more subdivision and armour coverage. You could use that displacement for that instead. So that's really the point at which you get fast battleships going really fast. The Iowas are a good example of this. They are fast battleships. And they are basically the point of, if they were battle cruisers, especially if they were battle cruiser 2 words, they would be blisteringly fast. We're talking probably as fast as modern nuclear carriers. The big nuclear carriers that the US Navy can theoretically go, if you think about them opening all their taps. So this is the reality as well. This is also another thing. This is why we have to, when we're considering these ships and we're talking about the spectrum, we have to, of course, consider that a ship's position on that spectrum, it's not just defined by speed. It's not just there is a factor in it of how, at that point, how good are the engines. But that suddenly, because you're able to go a certain speed, doesn't make you a battle cruiser rather than a fast battleship. If you've still got the density and you've got the armor of the fast battleship, it just means the engines are better. That's all it means. Now, the Kongo started off as battle cruisers. One word. They are improved. In many ways, improved Queen Marys, but Tigers is often also accounted for them. And they're good ships. They are good ships. During the interwar years, a couple of them are, well, all of them go through modernization, and a couple of them have so much modernization, especially in terms of subdivision added, not necessarily in terms of armor upgraded, but subdivision added, that they probably do just about saunter across the, the midpoint between battle cruiser and fast battleship, and are edging towards fast battleship. And that's the thing, when you're talking about a spectrum, ships very rarely neatly fit directly on the battle cruiser, directly on the battle cruiser, or the fast battleship, or the battleship. They're somewhere on that spectrum, and you're judging which of those points they're closest to. HMS Vanguard is a very good example. Why is she called a fully armoured battlecruiser? Why did the Royal Navy call her that? Well, that's because she retained battlecruiser subdivision and spacing, but they've given her the armour coverage that they would look for in a fast battleship. So she's a fully armoured battlecruiser because she's not a fast battleship because she's not got a subdivision of one. As in terms of what the Royal Navy would build the one with. But she's got the armouring of one, so she's a fully armoured battlecruiser. And the Royal Navy's being very careful to specifically define its ships at this point because of the experience of Hood and because of the amount of people who kept referring to her as a fast battleship, and the Royal Navy really ignored it. And she, of course, she wasn't. She was a battlecruiser. She was always... In fact, she started off as a battle cruiser as the design. The Admiral class started off as a purely economic warfare, reconnaissance, large capital ship. And then they evolved her into a battlecruiser, one word. And because of what they wanted to do to evolve the remaining admirals to that level and maybe make them better versions of that, that's why they give up, because it's becoming so expensive. It's cheaper and easier to build new ships. It's also why when people say the G3s would have been were fast battleships, they weren't. They were battle cruisers. That's what they're designed and subdivided as. Just it's reflective of the period of the amount of horsepower you can get and the efficiency of the design that they are shaped as they are. Now, the Kongos, as said, a couple of them, I would argue including Kongo, have pretty much evolved to the point where they are now playing fast and loose with that fuzzy area between fast battlecruiser and fast battleship. To such an extent, I would say they've maybe edged over it. So they're good. They're well upgraded ships, but the trouble is they end up making themselves an absolute perfect target. And when I say perfect target, I mean this is what happens. 21st of November at midnight, plus 20 minutes. USS Sealion, which doesn't look like an amphibious transport at the time, got a radar contact. She got a radar contact. And she was spotting an enemy formation of battleships and cruisers and escorts moving through the Taiwanese Strait. They were going about 16 knots and they were not zigzagging. They thought they were safe. That's lovely. They're not zigzagging. At 00:48 hours, 28 minutes later, the blips on the screen have refined to the point where they are working. They reckon there's 2 battleships and 2 cruisers. There's actually not. There's actually Yamato, Nagato, and Kongo. 2 battleships, a battle cruiser, and the cruiser Yahagi. And there's also destroyers: Hamikaze, Isakaze, Urakaze, Yukikaze, and Kiryanume. Now, they worked out there's 3 escorts on each beam. Roughly. By 02:45 hours, Sealion has managed to not only beat herself ahead of the task force, because they haven't been doing anything other than going at 16 knots, pretty much in a straight line, and, well, let's be honest, Sealion's surface speed is pretty darn good. On the surface, she can achieve 20 knots. 8.75 underwater, but it's 20 knots plus on above the water, and that's good. At roughly 02:56 hours, so think about this. this point, she's been tracking for over 2.5 hours. She's been tracking them, proceeding in a straight line. Sealion fires 6 torpedoes at the second ship in line, and this is the Kongo. 3 minutes later, she fires a further 3 at Nagato. At 0300 hours, 3 of her torpedoes hit the Kongo. They managed to flood 2 of the boiler rooms and gave her a pronounced list to port. Nagato at this point managed to turn hard, and the torpedoes miss Nagato. Miss Nagato. Sealion turns westward, and the Japanese are searching east because they think the torpedoes came from a different direction. And 0310 hours, Sealion reloads and again starts tracking the formation. The Japanese at this point though have started zigzagging, which makes things more difficult. And then the enemy split up. 0450 hours, Sealion finds that the Kongo, the target she hit, along with 2 destroyers, the Urakaze and Hamikaze, have started moving away. They're the slower group. She decides to try to carry out what's called an end around to get in front of them and to regain the attack position. And at 0524 hours, she hears a massive explosion and the Kongo disappears. In terms of the Kongo side, well, they had been doing their best to support themselves. The first hit had flooded her boiler rooms, but she's still able to do 16 knots. And she is trying to make Formosa. 15 minutes after detaching from the force at 0500 hours, well, she was listing 45 degrees and flooding uncontrollably. At that point, there's nothing else coming in. At 0518 hours, she lost all power and they're abandoning ship. At 0524, the 14-inch magazine explodes. And they lose a lot of senior officers. Moral of the story is, amazing how much more complicated life you can make for a submarine if you're zigzagging. But also, getting hit by 3 torpedoes is going to cause a lot of trouble. They are ship breakers. They're designed to do that, and they do it well. They really do. But, yeah. Back to this slide, of course. The slide where I explained what I was doing with this channel, on this video. I'm literally going through 10 days the year just to see what happened in terms of submarines lost. Shameless book club time, and I tend to use these to go, thank you for supporting the channel, thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, and doing all those things, thank you for commenting, thank you for all the engagement. It really does help the channel grow, and that means a lot to me because ultimately this channel is how I fund my research. This channel is how I don't have to worry about grants, I don't have to worry about any of those things. I can just go and do my research within limits because of your support. I can do the history because of your support. And hopefully there are going to be more books coming soon. And there's going to be one coming in probably March next year. Hey. And yeah, it's all thanks to you. It is all thanks to you. So thank you. Thank you very much. It wouldn't be possible without your support. It really wouldn't. And then, well, we have this. This is the Christmas history videos. Castlemaine has now moved to the 9th of December. But you should see the 2 historians. The next 2 historians is already up and ready for Wednesday, the 11th. So you want to build an aircraft carrier is on my next list of things to record, actually, over the next couple of days, to re-record again. And then we've got Patreon Live on the 13th of December. Hang on, no. 10th, 11th, 12th. 12th of December, sorry. And then it's Key Ships on the 13th, which is going to be a fun one. I am trying to resist the urge of key aircraft on the the 20th being Santa's sleigh. Comment below if you think I should keep resisting this urge, or if I should try and do a key aircraft Santa's sleigh edition. I don't know. I don't think a naval story and looking at it would be appropriate, but we'll see. We'll see what people think. So, on to the Suffren and SM U-52. Now, Suffren was one of those ships which came about after the French realised the Junocole doesn't work. Now, the Junocole, of course, have been this wonderful school of thought that what we need to do, and what we can do affordably, is instead of bothering to have capital ships or battleships like anyone else, we can be a major power and we can focus in on torpedo boats and cruisers. And our torpedo boats will wipe out any enemy fleet with their torpedoes. And our cruisers will be able to pillage the world's trade for us if we need to. So we can be the ultimate offset naval power. The trouble is, as often happens when someone's going, look, we have this new thing which is very small and fast and nimble and packs a massive punch. Suddenly they went, I have an idea of how to deal with this. And suddenly, our quick-firing, rapid-firing guns began to proliferate everywhere. It's amazing. It's almost as if the collective navies of the entire world went, excuse me, arms manufacturer. Yes, I have a small question. Yes. Do you have anything that fires quickly and will take an unarmored target and turn it into smithereens should it hit? You do? I'll take 14 dozen. And it worked. And because that happened, the French suddenly started having to build battleships again. And the trouble is, once it's a habit you've got out of, you find it difficult to get back into. And building something which is actually, I would say, equitable with your capabilities and your supposed standing. Suffren is a good example of this. She's not necessarily a bad ship, but she's certainly not the ship she could have been, or should have been. But still, they have her. The trouble is, she's also built between 1898 and 1904. She's actually launched in 1899. So she is really not built for a modern war. Let's be honest, there were torpedo boats around when she was being constructed, and that's one of the reasons why she has quite so many quick-firing small guns. But torpedo boats that could dive? Not realistically. But the thing is, what happens to her? What happens to her? Well, she's been wandering around the Mediterranean. She's been doing all sorts of duties, and she was fine. But she was originally intended to refit at the naval base at Bizet. But when a dockyard at Lorient informed the naval staff that it had room for her, they decided to send her there. She would recall at Bizet, but then she would go to the Lorient. And she sails out of the Mediterranean. She sails past Gibraltar. After getting some more coal, without escort, into the bay, up the coast, up the Portuguese coast, and she's not far really from Lisbon, just 50 nautical miles, when SM U-52 thinks she's had the absolute time of her life. Because she's en route to Catarratto in the Adriatic Sea. She's repeating what U-73 did. And she spots this battleship, unescorted, sailing in a straight line. She fires a torpedo. The torpedo managed to detonate the magazine of the Suffren. And she goes boom. That's it, pretty much. U-52, the submarine in question, searches the scene but finds no survivors and then just carries on, because that's what you do. Unescorted, capital ship, belonging to a nation which had focused so much on small vessels, and they still didn't have enough to spare. Now in this scenario we have basically World War One, end of World War One design light cruiser, which has been to an extent modernised and upgraded, but not much, because let's be honest, there wasn't much you could do to the D class. There were some things, but not a lot. And she was out hunting in the Atlantic. She had 2 other vessels with her as escorts, and she was searching for the Atlantis and the Python, 2 German surface raiders. Well, Python's more of a supply ship, but they were carrying out surface operations. And U-124 sees them, and they take a punt predicting on their maneuvers and their zigzagging, and they fire 2 torpedoes which manage to actually hit the Dunedin outside of the theoretical range of those torpedoes. The theoretical maximum range of those torpedoes was this, and Dunedin was here, and they still hit her. And the thing is, they managed to hit her in such a vital spot that she pretty much sinks within 17 minutes. And there are only 67 survivors from her crew. Something not far off 490 personnel, and there are 67 survivors. I think it's 486 from memory. Now, I will say this, though. She does well. She sunk the Dunedin, and she sunk a few other things in her career, but U-124 does not have a long life. If we consider she enters service on the 11th of June 1940 when she's commissioned, and on the 2nd of April 1943 she has the distinct displeasure of meeting HMS Stonecrop, a Flag-class corvette, and HMS Black Swan herself. All crew die in that. All the German crew die. The loss of Dunedin is actually annoying for the Royal Navy, though, because she was very useful in terms of tracking down and attacking surface raiders and those things. Because, let's be honest, a surface raider, for most surface raiders, coming across a cruiser, even an old light cruiser like that, is a nightmare. They ain't got anything that's going to take on that. It's armed with only a few single-mounted 6-inch guns, but there's enough single 6-inch guns to make a real big dent, plus torpedoes. It is a warship. But it's not got the same level of subdivision as, let's say, a Town-class cruiser has. But it's still a loss. It's still a loss. Which leads us to HMS Barham and U-331. Now, this is another interesting experience. A modernised, to an extent, Queen Elizabeth class. And she gets hit by torpedoes while she is zigzagging. But there is a reason why U-331 achieves this. U-331 achieves this because, well, she has some absolutely amazing luck. The Royal Navy as HMS Barham, first battle squadron, that's Barham, Queen Elizabeth Valiant, with 8 destroyers and with the 7th and 15 cruiser squadrons all together depart Alexandria. They are going to hunt for Italian convoys in the Central Mediterranean. That's their plan. And by pure chance, U-331 happens to be in their line of advance. They detect the engine noises the following morning, when the ships are getting closer. And when it comes to the afternoon, they're almost on reciprocal courses, is the phrase. And they go to the U-331 goes to battle stations. There's an ASDIC contact about 18 to 20 minutes later. This is about 16-20 hours from HMS Jervis. looking out, seeing, we think there could be a submarine there. But the trouble is, the angle is so that the contact comes back as so big, and the distance is so low, that they actually rule out as being a submarine, because it's too big to be a submarine. It's too big a contact to be a submarine. It's a whole new way of hiding. Instead of being hiding by pretending to be small, pretend to be so big that no one thinks you're a submarine. You think you're an underwater mountain. Or a malfunctioning Aztec. With this bit of luck, they get through the screen. And they use the leading ship, Queen Elizabeth, to line themselves up, but she goes past long before they can get her, and that means it's the second ship in line, which is a problem. And so they fire 4 torpedoes at Barham at a range of 375 to 390 meters. That's roughly 410 to 430 yards at 16:25 hours. Remember, she's managed to break through the group about 7 minutes earlier. She's broken through the escort. Now, at the same time she fires, she gets hit by the bowway from Valiant, which is not far away. And her conning tower broaches the surface, and she gets fired at by Valiant from a range of roughly 30 yards, 27, or sort of 25 to 28 meters, actually, with the pom-pom. Doesn't do much damage, but the U-331 dives, and dives so hard, she ends up going almost to double her depth rating. She goes not to 150 meters, which is her depth rating. She goes to 265 meters indicated, and may have been deeper than that to get away. At that point, she stabilizes and manages to get away. But it means she doesn't know what's going to happen. She doesn't know what happened. And it's at this point that 3 of the 4 torpedoes strike Barham amidships, so close together and such similar time that it might as well be one massive explosion. And no one's worked out what that does to a ship. No one had worked out what that did to a ship. Barham capsizes quite quickly. There's a video of this. If you have a strong stomach and don't find it looking at the people scrambling around, worrying when you know it's a real life, not a movie, you can type into Google and you can find it. But the sinking, the fire, everything, it's usually ascribed to the 4-inch magazines, which were outboard of 15-inch magazines, but there are other scenarios. It's quite easy to think that she would have had a compound situation going on. I honestly think with what hit her and where it hit her, I would say it would be a compound situation with multiple things going boom, but she has a massive explosion 4 minutes after she's been torpedoed, and that sinks her. HMS Hotspur managed to recover the Vice Admiral and a pair of personnel who sink from their wounds, but 337 officers and ratings were recovered by Hotspur, and Nizam rescued another 150. Captain Geoffrey Cook went down with his ship, along with 861 others. The trouble is, at that point, the Admiralty try and delay the news of the sinking because they don't want the Germans to have it confirmed by the news until they have managed to make the necessary adjustments. But the Germans make the claim very quickly, and that's why on the 27th of January they announce it. They announce it. And there's also some fun with the Witchcraft Act going on, but I'm not going to get into that too much details. But what is interesting is what happens to U-331 after this, because, well, she was out again, and this was her 3rd patrol. She was doing this. Her 10th patrol again. She goes off to try and attack Operation Torch, and eventually she's actually damaged by a escort vessel. 17th November, she gets further damaged by Lockheed Hudson from number 500 Squadron Royal Air Force. This meant that the forward hatch was jammed open, so the submarine couldn't dive. HMS Wilton, the destroyer, was ordered to go seize the submarine. However, 3 ferry albacores from HMS Furious of 820 Squadron, escorted by some, let's be honest, the Royal Navy called them martlets at the time, but we'll call them wildcats, of 893 Naval Air Squadron, launched from Formidable against the submarine. They didn't realise there had been any surrender signals. No one had told them. And so, as the wildcats, but as the Royal Navy called them martlets, were strafing the U-331, well, torpedoes were dropped, and 17 of her crew only survive, including her commander. 32 are killed. She's gone. She was on the surface. They were going to get her. Now, when it comes to this story, you're going to notice it's a lot of repetition, Alex, isn't it? Once again, it's a vessel sailing alone in an area where it doesn't expect to find a target. It's supposed to be attacked, so it's relying on its speed of 15 knots, and it's trying to do its best to avoid it, but it doesn't expect to be attacked, so it's not really prepared. And it's not being escorted. So isn't this just more of the same, Alex? And you would be right. You will be completely right. That is the reality of what we're talking about. Because Nova Scotia was on one of her first taskings. Realistically, she had been taken up by the Ministry of War Transport in 1941. She had gone out to Sierra Leone by March, and then she'd gone to Cape Town in South Africa, and then she had gone to into the Indian Ocean, worked in there, and then she's on her way down. Now she's actually loaded with Italian prisoners of war, and civilian internees, and mail bound for Durban, South Africa. She's passing through the Mozambique Channel. And at 07:15 hours on the 28th of November 1942, U-177 hits her with 3 torpedoes. I would say that's kind of overkill for a merchant ship of a little under 7,000 gross registered tons. I would say 3 torpedoes is overkill. I'd say deck gun probably would have worked. And seeing she has a top speed of 15 knots, you'd probably have hit her. But there again, if you wanted to surprise her, sink her without her being able to get off much of the information, that's probably the better way to go. She rolled to port, caught fire, and had gone down by the bow within 10 minutes. The Nova Scotia, in fact, was sunk so quickly, they'd only launched 1 lifeboat. And so survivors are on life rafts and pieces of wreckage, and those who were in the water were, we'll say, hopefully drowned, but could have had a very short, sharp introduction to sharks. U-177 actually had to surface to recover 2 survivors to work out who they had been sunk, and they found out they were Italian merchant sailors. At this point, they have an issue. They do have an issue. There is the Laconia order, and Donetsk had issued it 2 months previously. So they withdraw to radio the BDU for orders. That's the Befehlshaber der U-Boot, their high command. They order them to leave the survivors in the water, even despite them being allies, and continue patrol. And in return, then the Befehlshaber der U-Boot call up Portugal, who send out a patrol vessel, the Alfonso de Albuquerque, from Marquez in Mozambique to try and do some research and find people. Trouble is, they don't get there till the 29th of November. At which point they find 5 survivors alive. The very next day, they find themselves at dawn surrounded by hundreds of floating corpses. In that, they did manage to rescue a further 130 internees, 42 guards, 17 crew members, 3 military naval personnel, a DEMS gunner, and a passenger. 858 people had died. 2 more survivors actually managed to reach safety. Most of the corpses, when they did wash ashore, washed ashore in Natal and are buried there, or were buried there until they were moved. But yes, the Nova Scotia. And by the way, those thinking that U-177 has a full war or anything, no, they get sunk by US aircraft on 6th February 1944. Again, on its 3rd patrol. 3rd major patrol. They were a long-range Type 9 D2 submarine, and on their 3rd patrol, they get sunk by a P-4BY Liberator, and their crew that survive are picked up by USS Omaha. Now, this was our first one which involved a submarine which was not American or German. And it rather surprised me, because I was looking through the British submarine list of operations, and basically this is a condensed list because it's the list of ships which are large enough to warrant talking about. But also, realistically, this was what came up. This all comes about from me looking at a list when I was doing the first 2 vessels and going, hang on, they're both on this strange list on Wikipedia. What's this list about? And it's basically a list of ships sunk where the death toll exceeds 150. And that's the requirement. They have to, more than 150 have to have died for it to be included on this list. And when I found it, I thought, well, that's intriguing. I'm not sure why anyone put that together on Wikipedia, but actually it's kind of useful. And then I went and did some research. And when I started hunting down things and verifying, I went, oh, that is interesting. And then, of course, that allowed me to do this. To go through there and think, these are 10 days in November. Which events happen on these 10 days? Now, Lisocme Bay, her loss, well, she's a Casablanca-class escort carrier. She is a Casablanca-class escort carrier. And she was taking part, along with her task force, along with the force around her, in operations around Batari Island. And, well, this is part of the whole sort of invasion of Gilbert Islands, and the fact that the Japanese have been once again caught by surprise. So, Admiral Mineshi Koga orders 4 of his submarines to withdraw. They were southwest of Hawaii, and he orders the 5 submarines which were near Truk, all to converge on the Gilbert Islands. 9 submarines are sent on this mission. 6 will be no more after this. 9 are sent. And, well, on the 23rd of November, I-175 spots and starts noticing, ooh, I can see these escort carriers. I can see these vessels which are providing air support. And then starts realizing, there's more. There are battleships here and destroyers. There's Lisocme Bay, of course, and 2 sisters, Korigoro and Coral Sea, joined by USS Baltimore, a cruiser, and Pennsylvania, New Mexico, and Mississippi, 3 battleships and 7 destroyers. Lisocme Bay is actually in the center. She's acting as the guide for the group. Now, the problem is, someone had made a decision that this force working together, it was far more dangerous for there to be collisions than the likelihood risk of submarines. So they weren't zigzagging. And 04:30 hours on the 20th of November, reveal is sounding on Lisocme Bay. One of the destroyers, Franks, goes off to investigate a beacon which may have been dropped by a Japanese aircraft. This makes a gap in the task group screen. And not only are they not manoeuvring, there's now a gap in their screen because someone's gone off to investigate something, and they haven't reorientated the forces to change it. 0436 as New Mexico, that lovely battleship, gets a short blip on its radar, and which is believed to be I-175 diving into position. Flight quarters were being sounded at this point, and crew were at general quarters, and the flight crews were getting ready to launch their aircraft by 0505, and there are 13 planes up on the deck. 13 planes. Or 13 aircraft. I'm just going to add this in, that planes has an S on the end. Aircraft doesn't matter if it's one or a dozen, it's always never has an S. It doesn't need it. Just saying. Been marking essays again. Marking essays again. It's always fun. Now, they'd been fueled, they were armed, and there were another 7 aircraft sitting in the hangar that were not fueled or armed. Neither fueled or armed. There is munitions aboard. Unfortunately, this group, which is not zigzagging, turns to northeast. At which point, Lisocme Bay is now presenting her side perfectly to I-175, and the submarine fires at least 3 Type 95 torpedoes. At least 3. Possibly as many as 5. So, at 0510 hours, this is 5 minutes after you've got those aircraft on deck and general quarters being sounded, they sight a torpedo heading for the ship. They don't sight in time to do anything about it. The torpedo strikes behind the aft engine room. Lisocme Bay was still continuing its turn, and as the torpedo hit the aft engine behind the aft engine room, it also managed to detonate the bomb magazine. Now, when you detonate the bomb magazine, there ain't much of a escort carrier left. There really isn't. Debris was falling on the New Mexico, 1,500 yards away. A sailor aboard the Coral Sea was hit, he reckoned, by a fire extinguisher from the Lisocme Bay. And the entire force, the whole task group, feels the effects of the explosion. It's described as being mushroom cloud-like, rising thousands of feet above where the Lisocme Bay had been. The detonation, well, how to put it, it takes off the stern of the carrier, and anyone behind the forward bulkhead of the aft engine room is gone. When you make a big hole in a ship, what tends to happen? Well, seawater comes rushing in. And as I said before, there are 2 ways to sink a ship. Start a fire, which they can't put out, or let enough water in. That's how you sink a ship. Well, you've started a fire that really can't be put out. The forward part of the hangar that's around is engulfed in flames. The planes on deck are also on fire. Planes are falling off the carrier's deck on fire. Compressed air, steam, and main pressure are all lost. Oh, and there's water rushing into the hull. The superstructure is collapsing onto the deck, and the ammunition within the burning aircraft and AA guns starts to detonate, and, well, there's gasoline flowing out into the water around the Lisocme Bay, which also catches fire. Within 23 minutes after the explosion, Lisocme Bay lists to starboard and sinks, taking with her the rear admiral aboard, taking with her Doris Miller, the gentleman for whom a aircraft carrier is to be named, and who was awarded a Navy Cross for his actions during the attack on Pearl Harbor. He deserves it. But they are just a couple under the total of 54 officers and 648 sailors who are killed. Now, what happens then? Well, the destroyers, Morris, Hugh and Hull, all try their best to try and recover people until they spot torpedo wakes. At which point, New Mexico detects another echo on her radar. And USS Hull recalled Gridley to try and drop some depth charges, and they do their best to do that. I would add, though, that I-175, she's not lost till the 4th of February 1944. She's one of the ships which make it, one of the boats of the Japanese which actually make it out of the Gilbert and Marshall Islands campaign. Although, her end... well, her end is, once again, and there's a theme coming onto this, on the 10th War Patrol. And once again, by the way, it starts off with her being detected by a battleship. This was the USS New Jersey. Battleships with radar becoming threats to submarines. HMS Dreadnought would be so proud. The Suez Maru, well, she is another of those in-between cargo/passenger ships of the Japanese. And she's lost on 29th of November 1943. She had been involved in the war fully up to this point. But her loss, well, she's carrying 547 prisoners of war. That's 414 British and 133 Dutch. From Ambon to Surabaya. The prisoners of war were all sick. Sick from the work camps on Moluccas and Ambon. 20 were on stretchers. There are also a further 200 sick and wounded Japanese troops aboard. So yes, you are mostly dealing with 750 sick and wounded passengers. At this point, she gets to Kagan Island. She is running as fast as she can, and as fast as she can is 10.5 knots. She was reportedly not zigging or zagging, and USS Bonefish, which is a very capable submarine, after all, it is a Gato class, unaware that this vessel is carrying Allied prisoners of war, torpedoes her. Between 250 and 280 of the prisoners of war managed to escape the holds and jump into the ship, into the water. The problem is, number 12 Minesweeper goes off to try and depth charge the Bonefish. Doesn't damage it, doesn't hurt it. And it then resorts to picking up the survivors who've been sitting in the water for 4 hours. It only picks up the Japanese It pushes the Allied prisoners of war back into the water if they try to climb aboard. Now, at this point, they carried out their next orders, which were, if the vessel was sunk, they were ordered that if they were sunk, the POW prisoners of war should be shot. They used 20 troops with rifles on deck and 2 machine guns on lower bridge, and they start machine gunning survivors in the wreckage. There were no survivors. There were no survivors. It was not investigated till 1949 when Yoshio Kazuaki, who was one of the wounded Japanese soldiers aboard the Suez Maru that day, didn't confess, but informed authorities. It was decided, politically it seems, and by the government at the time, and this is the government of 1950s Britain, that the world was better if they let it go to rest. It was decided that if there was a war crime trial, that would distress the families too much and would cause problems back in the UK, and especially with burgeoning Anglo-Japanese relations. Seems to be roughly the theory of what happened. They are known war criminals who were never brought to justice because the British government decided to not do so. You can argue for or against their reasoning, but at that point, at that time, there were issues going on with the Soviet Union, there were issues going on elsewhere in the world, and the government had managed to get people focused on the future, and they hoped people were recovering. I myself don't agree with the decision. It's not what I would do, it's not how I have ever played cricket, if that's the right phrase to use. But it's what they decided, with the best intentions in mind, I would argue. I would argue it's misguided, but I would never argue it's not with the best intentions in mind. In fact, usually I would say governments act from the best the people who are making decisions act with the best intentions in mind. However, their intentions and assessment might be misguided. They are often caught in logic loops which anyone outside the organisation would go, are you listening to yourself? Institutional capture is not necessarily the thing people take it to be. People can assume because they have the responsibility and power they have to act in a certain way, and they must try and do their best to prevent people having hurt, prevent problems. And so it's easier to cover it up and potentially prevent the problem happening than it is to actually confront the problem and deal with it. Confronting problems and dealing with them can cause trouble if you fail to do it successfully. Sometimes we all get our priorities out of order, and this is a situation where that happened. Now, Urakaze and USS Sealion here, you're probably going, well, Alex, that's the same date as you were talking about earlier. Yeah, I was talking about when the Kongo was sunk. You see, remember when I said Nagato turned away in time and those other 3 torpedoes? Well, they carried on, those 3 torpedoes. Nagato might have avoided the torpedoes, but no one else did. Urakaze, a lovely destroyer, got hit. It got hit in the center. And, well, how do I put this politely? They hit her magazine. They hit a destroyer's magazine point. And that means there isn't any real protection. There's no armor on a destroyer. There's space, there's subdivision, a little bit of it, but there isn't much. And the magazine is fairly close to the hull. In fact, it could be right on the hull, depending on the design you're looking at and whatever you're going for. And, yeah, she just goes boom with all hands. Everything's gone. So yeah, Nagato survived, but because she survived, one of her protectors didn't. It is from that second wave of 3 torpedoes. And only 1 torpedo was necessary. But again, we're talking about a vessel which is 2,500 tons. And they hit her right where it hurts the most, in her magazines. Now we're here to our last vessel we're talking about, the loss of the Shinano, and I would say this was the subject of a very interesting Armchair Admirals episode not that long ago on Twitch. It was a very cool panel and we had a long discussion about it. And the thing is, Shinano is supposed to be in a safe place. She's supposed to be in a space where they are quickly moving her to where she can be fitted out, to where she can be made operational, properly operational. The problem is, she had been detected at 24:48 hours at night on the 28th of November. And Archerfish managed to follow her on a parallel course. The Shinano actually does detect the submarine's radar before that. But the trouble is, they were zigzagging. They were actually zigzagging, and they didn't manage to maneuver to avoid the radar. Instead, they end up with their zigzagging turning themselves into the Archerfish's path on several occasions, is the phrase that's used in various reports. Multiple times. Habitually, almost, is what I would say. It's really bad. You've detected radar. You know there's something like that. So you are zigzagging. But you're zigzagging into the track of the radar, where it could be. At 22:45 hours, the Shinano spots the Archerfish on the surface, and Urakaze, their destroyer, breaks formation against orders, and it's worthwhile saying that, against orders, to try and investigate. The captain of the Shinano orders the submarine and the destroyer to return. He does this because he believes that the Americans are using wolfpack tactics, and that Archerfish is being used to decoy and lure the submarines away, the escorts away, to allow the rest of the pack a clear attack on the Shinano. It's a wonderful scenario, apart from where you consider where you are, and where they are is actually in the internal Sea of Japan. I'm not talking about the actual Sea of Japan, which is a whole different body of water. I'm talking about, if you look at the Japanese islands, you'll notice the way they're structured, there's a sort of space between the two of the larger ones, and going down to the third main one. They're in that area. They're in that area. So if there's a wolf pack there, you're in trouble. You're in masses of trouble. Now, he tries to order his force to turn away and to try and outrun it. He felt he had a few knots advantage over the submarine. But unfortunately, the propeller shaft on the Shinano was overheating. There's a bearing overheating, and that means that they have to turn down to 18 knots. Now, theoretically, the Shinano, theoretically, is capable of 28 knots. Theoretically, it's capable of many, many more knots than the submarine on the surface, and yet it's now doing 18 knots, which means it's well within Archerfish's ability to catch up. At 02:56 hours, just the Shinano is turning to the southwest and heading straight for where Archerfish is going to be. Archerfish turns east and submerges. They set their torpedoes for 10 feet so that they don't run. Even if they run deep, they should still hit the target. It was also felt by the Americans that if you punch the holes higher up in the ship, they'll increase the chance of capsizing by introducing water higher up into the ship. And this is not wrong. If the water goes in low, it's not going to have as much bearing on the metacentric point and the point of the turning point of the ship to make it capsize. Archerfish fires 6 torpedoes and then dives to 400 feet to get away. 4 of those torpedoes hit Shinano. Their average depth for those hits is 14 feet. So setting them for a 10 feet run was right, because if the average depth is 14 feet, that means there's a fairly large spread going on. Mostly deeper than it's supposed to be. The first was a hit in the stern. which overwhelmed refrigeration storage compartments and one of the aviation gasoline storage tanks, which was empty. If it had been fuel, it might have been full. It might have been a different situation, but as it was empty, it overwhelmed it and killed some of the sleeping engineering personnel in the compartments above, which is problematic from both you've lost personnel and you've lost key personnel scenario of damage control. The second, well, that went to where the starboard outboard propeller shaft entered the hull and flooded the outboard engine room. Oh, happy days. Third, flooded the number 3 boiler room and killed everyone on watch there. And the structural failures within that room caused 2 adjacent boiler rooms to flood as well. And the fourth flooded the starboard air compressor room and the anti-aircraft magazines and the number 2 damage control station and ruptured an oil tank. Now, this was severe damage, but she was still judged manageable. She was still afloat. She's had 4 torpedoes. If you consider HMS Eagle and others, hitting 4 torpedoes is a tremendous event and should have caused them to be completely gone. But, yeah, they're still standing. They're still going. The ship's listing 10 degrees to starboard, and the crew are pumping roughly 3,000 tons of water into the port bilges to try and decrease the list, but it's increasing to 13 degrees. Then the damage reports start coming in, and they start realizing it's bad, and so they change course to Shinano Point. And flooding keeps increasing. They're at 15 degrees by 0330 hours. Pretty much by 420 hours, roughly 50 minutes later, 420 hours, they have managed to reduce the list to 12 degrees by filling the empty outboard water tanks to again and flooding and counter flooding some more. But 40 minutes after that, 0500 hours, the captain's ordering civilian workers be transferred to the escorts. They're getting in the way of the crew and their duties is the official line, but unofficially, who are more likely to be able to evacuate quickly? The crew, who are trained in these procedures to an extent, or the civilian personnel who were doing their best to help out? By 0530 hours, she's making 10 knots with a 13 degree list. By 0600 hours, she's at a 20 degree list. The starboard boiler room's flooded, and the valves of the port trimming tanks are now above waterline and are now ineffective when you want to try and put water in there. So they're above the water. The engines shut down completely. They cease due to lack of steam at 0700 hours. At this point, all propulsion compartments are evacuated. That's achieved over the next hour. He then tries to flood, the captain tries to flood the 3 outboard boiler rooms in a further attempt to reduce the carrier's list. He's taking on a huge amount of water here. He also orders the destroyers, Hamikaze and Urakaze, to take her in tow, but two destroyers, which are 2,500 tons each, roughly 5,000 tons between them, are not really enough to overcome her dead weight and get her moving. And the tow cables snap. And there's also the fact she's taken on a huge amount of water, which has increased her weight, increased her displacement. By 0900 hours, she has no power, and she's listing at 20 degrees. At 10:20 hours, the captain tells the crew to save themselves. He won't issue orders to abandon the ship, but he tells them to save themselves. At this point, Shinano's at a 30 degree list. Added to this, when she does eventually heel over and water flows into an open elevator well on a flight deck, a large number of swimming sailors who are trying to get away are hauled back into her. And as an exhaust vent blows on the flight deck to an extent, as it's sucked down, more sailors are sucked into the ship. As she finally goes. She capsizes and sinks at roughly 1100 hours. 1057 hours is sometimes what's listed as, but it's roughly 1100 hours. And the captain and both his navigators went down the ship. Of the crew aboard, 55 officers, 993 enlisted and petty officers, and 32 civilians survive. The Japanese tried to isolate them to suppress the news of the carrier's loss, and to an extent they were successful, but the carriers formally struck from Neuraja in August in August 45. Actually, it was such an issue that the US Naval Intelligence didn't initially believe that the Archerfish had actually sunk the Shinano, because they detected no messages saying so. But eventually, they find out it's true. They find out it's true, and they credit them. There are many reasons for why this happened. Some people talk about the join between the armor belt on the waterline on the upper hull and the anti-torpedo bulge, and that the torpedoes all explode along this joint. But honestly, to my mind, there have been many issues in her rush construction. She hadn't been air tested, so the compartments hadn't been tested for leaks. And the thing is, when you've got that 4 torpedoes hitting and causing that much damage, unless you have the services of a nearby floating dry dock or some other form of vessel which can add its stability to your own and its ability to float to your own, you're in trouble. 4 torpedoes is not good. 4 torpedoes is a lot of damage. A lot of damage. And that's going to be a lot of strain on the hull. And that being said, normally I finish these videos with a question. I'm not doing that now, today. I am going to be carrying it on, but I'm not doing that now, today, because I think there should be enough comments about this video without me adding a question to it, and enough discussion. But the point is this. I did this so you've got a bit of an overview, a study of what 10 days in history can have, kind of events can have on them. And yes, there are criteria in limiting it down to make it manageable. But it was an interesting thing for me when I found it, and then valuing the resource and turning into something which I could use as an academic because it was an interesting idea. I think that was interesting for me. And I'm going to be looking out for other scenarios like this in future for videos, because I think it was an interesting one to do for a bit of a survey of 10 days. 10 days of submarine warfare. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. There are none of these left to come. None of these left to come. It's all into the Christmas series now. So thank you for supporting the channel. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you, and hope to see you tomorrow for brew ships and maybe the stuff on Twitch earlier in the morning. And then Monday is going to be HMAS Castlemaine. It'll be good. Actual footage from the Castlemaine, from the trip to Australia years back, which was delayed because of things I had last Christmas. Thank you very much again. Take care.